And finally, let's talk about the specific real estate market and what's going on in 2020 in Sudbury. Finally, when we're looking at what's going on with the average prices, we can see that essentially since January of 2020, the Sudbury market's just been on absolute tear, especially if you discount for the month of March. Sudbury is dramatically increasing. We're almost seeing a $50,000 increase in the average price of a home being sold simply over the last year. What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about Sudbury, Ontario. Now, this is an interesting market to me because I constantly get asked questions about markets like Sudbury, North Bay, Timmins, and Thunder Bay. And I think the common reason that I get asked a lot of questions about these markets is a lot of investors in southwestern Ontario and the GTA, they're constantly looking to other markets in Ontario that maybe have a lower entry point from a purchase price, as well as higher cash flow on a monthly basis. So Sudbury, or what we're really going to be referring to today as the Greater Sudbury market, has a population of about 160,000. If you guys are unfamiliar, you can see here on my screen share just a little bit of context exactly where Sudbury is in relation to Toronto. So again, when we're talking about the Greater Sudbury area, we're talking up here. So it's north of Cottage Country. You know, it's quite a distance from Parry Sound in the Muskoka region. So just a little bit north of Lake Nipissing here. All right, before diving into some of the statistics behind Sudbury, let's quickly take a look at just the different regions and neighborhoods in the city of Greater Sudbury. So I thought this was a pretty cool link here, just breaking down Sudbury into its different neighborhoods respectively, or the different communities. There'll be a link to all the different websites and all the different reports I mentioned throughout today's video in the video description down below, so you guys can always jump over and grab it there. But let's move into some actual statistics now about the city. All right, let's jump over to some quick facts about Sudbury. So we've got 330 freshwater lakes in the region. It's got a total population of 166,000 as of 2016. 1,600 new residents welcomed to Greater Sudbury from 2011 to 2016. That's not a huge population increase, but it's good to know. 26% of residents identify as French as their mother tongue. So that was interesting. That was something I was unaware of, and certainly something as a landlord or real estate investor that we'd want to be aware of if you're looking at investing in Sudbury. Beyond that, you know, we've got different statistics about the transportation network there. And then the educational institutions. So they've got 3 post-secondary institutions, College Boreal, Cambrian College, and Laurentian University. There's 595 medical doctor graduates from Northern School of Medicine since 2009, and there's 1,510 post-secondary international students in 2019. So there's a little bit of an international student community there as well. And then when we're looking at the taxes, if you're interested, but what I really just wanted to highlight was the city of Sudbury seems to really put together some great information. So it made putting together this entire report a lot more fun because of the way they just had so much data and it was so easy to access as well. The next thing I want to move on to here is the employment by sector. So what we've got here is, you know, in industrial, we've got 20% of the Greater Sudbury area compared to 18% in Ontario, 4% in transportation and warehousing, 27.5% in office. Greater Sudbury's got 15% in relation to wholesale and retail trade, 8% in education. Non-commercial services makes up 7.6%. Health is 14.5%, and then other is 2.1%. And so this doesn't surprise me per se to see the education and health at a higher overall percentage of the labor force or the employment sector compared to, say, the province of Ontario. And the reason for this is, especially when we get into those northern communities, the larger cities are really going to be the central hub. So that's where all the government services, all the post-secondary institutions are going to be clustered. And Sudbury is a great example of that as well. Moving on, let's jump into the economic bulletin that the Greater Sudbury area has put together for us. And this is actually for October 2020. So also love the fact that it's literally October 31st and they've already got their October 2020 info out. They're really on top of it. So when we're looking at total employment, right, and what's going on, the unemployment rate in Sudbury is 8.5, which is actually below the Ontario rate by 2% because Ontario's at 10.5%. So that's great to see as a real estate investor. Shows that COVID-19 didn't negatively impact Sudbury as greatly as, say, the rest of Ontario. Moving down this list, we've also got the average house price. So in Sudbury, you're looking at $339,000 compared to all of Ontario at $741,000. You don't have to be a mathematician there to understand that you can literally buy a house for less than half the price of the rest of Ontario on average in Sudbury. And then looking at building permits, we can see that they issued $19 million worth of building permits in September 2020. And again, just some other additional great facts there that you guys can check out. Looking at overall what's going on with total employment, they've got this great little chart here that will show us exactly where things were going. So pre-COVID, we can see that they were already on a drop in regards to the total employment going on, but since June, they've actually been rebounding. So this wasn't necessarily something that was only brought on by COVID, but I'm sure that COVID didn't help in that regards either. And yet overall, it's still got a better unemployment rate than the rest of Ontario. So that's important to see. We can see a participation rate of 61% here. So that's going to be a little bit lower than you'd likely expect. And part of the reason is, as I was doing my research on these different cities, I started to learn a lot about the Northern Ontario market. And if you didn't realize, there's actually a real aging population issue, which we'll come back to in a second. But that's something to be aware of, and that's why you're probably going to see a lower participation rate in some of the northern cities, like, for example, Sudbury. Jumping further down this document, let's just take a quick look at the housing stats so we can see, what's going on from housing stats and where we're at year to date and how that's changed year over year as well. So right now we can see housing stats are pretty low in regards to Sudbury compared to last year. Not a big surprise there because, again, 2020 is a weird year because of COVID. Here's a great little snippet though about the Sudbury real estate market. So on a year-to-date basis, home sales totaled 2,060 units over the first 9 months of the year. This edged up, 3.8% from the same period in 2019, and the average price of homes sold in September 2020 was a record $339,000, rising 27% from September 2019. And this is in line with what we're seeing across a lot of Ontario real estate markets. And you guys have probably noticed it on some of my other videos we've already released, but Ontario's been on a real tear during the second half of 2020 in regards to housing prices. Then taking a quick look at the rental market, they've got a great little chart here that they've pulled from CMHC. And in fact, I also already did have the CMHC report up here in case we needed to jump over. But I love the fact that Sudbury's already got their shit together and they've put it all together in this document for us. But we can see exactly where our vacancy rates are at. So from 2017 to 2019, they've been on a consistent decline. And as of October 2019, Sudbury had only a vacancy rate of 2.1%. That's great from a landlord's perspective. That means that there's not nearly enough supply to keep up with demand. So that's going to put pressure on prices. So I would expect to see rents increasing in Sudbury. And then if we look down at what's going on with the average rent price, we can see that there's been some increase. It hasn't been particularly dramatic, but if we look in the 2-bedroom section, for example, we can see it went from $1,050 to $1,114. So about, what's that work out to? A $65 increase per month over the last 2 years. That works out to maybe about a 3% increase. Not as dramatic as I would have expected, but I expect that we're going to continue to see rent prices increasing in Sudbury if we see that vacancy rate stay as low as it is, as well as we see the house prices increase overall. That often as well will force landlords to require a greater rent in order to be able to break even. Just one little aside here, guys. This isn't actually that particularly important to us as real estate investors, but I just found it interesting. On this document, they also break down what's going on in regards to insolvencies. So we can look and see how many people filed for bankruptcy this year compared to last year. In fact, it's dramatically decreased in the greater Sudbury area. It's decreased by 50% year over year since Q2, and it's decreased over 53% year over year for consumer bankruptcies. So at least people aren't going bankrupt nearly as often as they were last year in Sudbury. Maybe that has to do with COVID and the CERB benefits. Maybe it is a reflection of the overall economy. As we did mention earlier, we did see the fact that the overall unemployment rate is lower in Sudbury than the rest of Ontario. All right, the next piece of data I want to share with you guys is what's going on with the population in Sudbury. Is it growing? Is it shrinking, declining? What's going on there? Well, if you check out this little news report from CBC, we can see the population boom projected for Sudbury by 2046. A recent report showed that they could receive up to 15,000 new people over the next 20 to 30 years. Now, this would represent a approximate 10% overall increase in the population if we're comparing it to the total greater Sudbury region right now, which is around 160,000. We've got another article here, Sudbury, only major city in North expected to add more people, according to a report, and then a growing challenge for Sudbury and Northern Ontario. So what all these different reports are really indicative of, or really hitting home on, is that there is a problem both in Sudbury as well as just the general North. So the first problem is most northern cities are not growing. And so this is a problem every city and territory district in Northern Ontario is facing. Since 1996, 8 out of 11 Northern Ontario districts have experienced a large population decline. The report in Northern Ontario is a collection of 11 census districts across a huge landscape with a little more than 780,000 people. And it's exemplified in markets like Rainy River and Crochane districts, which have dropped by 13% and 14% respectively, and the decline is projected to continue into 2041 based upon estimates prepared by the Ontario Ministry of Finance. And you guys, again, all the links to everything we're talking about is in the video description down below. But it's really important to understand that these northern cities are not all growing. Sudbury is actually the exception to the rule. So it's the only major city that's expected to grow over the next 20 years. That's something as a real estate investor we need to really understand. And again, while I was doing my research, I found a very interesting presentation here from the Northern Policy Institute titled Demographic Trends in Greater Sudbury, Sudbury and Manitoulin. And so what really stood out to me is what an aging population these northern cities have overall. And so when we're looking at the demographic trends, population is aging, I think this graph kind of shows you everything you need to see, but we can see dramatically over the next 20, 30 years, it's really expected to see that population almost double in regards to the 65 and older category. That's really important for us to understand as landlords, because if anything, that means that aging population base, well, they may make for a great renter base, they're unlikely to have an increase in purchasing power, right? Retirees are rarely moving up the socioeconomic ladder. So that's something we need to be aware of, and it could result in more stagnant rent growth price than you might expect for a city that is still seeing a population boom. As well, because of this aging population boom, we're naturally going to be looking at a decrease in productivity. So we can see that Sudbury won't be as dramatic necessarily as, say, Manitoulin, which seems like it's going to be the most impacted, where over the next 30 years, it could see a decrease of 1% overall in productivity, which isn't something you would naturally expect in a North American city or market. One last thing talking about the aging workforce in Sudbury is they had this really interesting graph here showing the almost 40,000 workers that are set to retire by 2021 and what industries they're in as well. So again, what's interesting is while Sudbury actually is expected to see a population growth, because of this aging workforce, because of the lack of the participation rate of the overall population in Sudbury, that could actually put a damper on the growth trajectory of Sudbury. And some of the articles I read really highlighted this and their concerns that if Sudbury doesn't start attracting more immigrants internationally, that they may really struggle to grow, and the city could actually shrink even though people may be trying to move into it. If there's not enough labor there to actually build the city bigger, to keep the infrastructure and maintain it and help employers find the quality skills that they need in the labor force, that can be a major issue. The one thing about Sudbury that was actually a little bit more difficult for me to find was what's going on with the major employers. So I was able to find this little graph or chart that you guys can check out on Wikipedia, just highlighting the major companies or organizations from an employment standpoint. So we've got Vail, which has over 4,000 employees in the mining sector. We've got Health Sciences North with 3,700 employees, so that's going to be a public entity, right, where Vail is a private mining company. Then we've got the Sudbury Tax Services Office with 2,800. This is a federal government building. Then the City of Greater Sudbury has just over 2,000 municipal workers. Laurentian University with 1,800. The Rainbow District School Board with 1,600. The Ontario Ministry and Agencies with 1,500, and that's the Ontario government. And then we've also got the French Catholic School Board with 1,400, and then Exastra, another mining company with just over 1,100 employees. So what we're going to see here is really, it's all public sector employment or mining when it comes to Sudbury when we're talking about the largest major employers. So as an investor, we're going to want to pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the mining industry as well as with public funding in Sudbury, because that's going to really dictate where the employment rate is as well as just overall the health of the economy. And finally, let's talk about the specific real estate market and what's going on in 2020 in Sudbury. So I've got the Canadian Real Estate Association stats and graphs up here. So we can see, like a lot of other markets, sales activity has increased dramatically in 2020 for Sudbury, which is very common based upon a lot of the other markets we were looking at as well. We can also see that new listings have increased dramatically. However, even though new listings have increased dramatically, overall, the active listings is decreasing dramatically. And when we're looking at September only, we're at under 500 active listings. So this is going to create a lot of pressure when it comes to the prices on the Sudbury real estate market. If I had to bet, I bet that we're going to continue to see this trend continue, at least until we see more supply enter or demand drop dramatically. So overall, when we're talking about supply and demand, the residential months of inventory available currently in Sudbury is under 2 months. So this is definitely a seller's market, and we're going to continue to see that pressure. And then finally, when we're looking at what's going on with the average prices, we can see that essentially since January of 2020, the Sudbury market's just been on an absolute tear, especially if you discount for the month of March, which was month of March or April, I can't tell there, but that was an unusual month because of COVID-19. But otherwise, Sudbury is dramatically increasing. We're almost seeing a $50,000 increase in the average price of a home being sold simply over the last year. So that's massive when we're talking about it increasing from, say, $275,000 to over $325,000 in the last year. Now, whether this is sustainable, we're going to have to look at a lot of the different macroeconomic factors that we've discussed throughout this video. But looking at the population growth and projections for Sudbury, now, looking at the aging demographics, that is a mild concern for me, but the population growth is a positive. And when looking at the employment sector, I'm really just going to be trying to get dialed in on what's going on in the mining industry. Now, when I did some of my basic research here on Sudbury, overall things look pretty pleasant as long as they can continue to get a young enough labor force to be able to meet the demand of the employers in Sudbury. All right, guys, that's it for this video on Sudbury, Ontario's real estate market. I hope you enjoyed this market update. Let me know, are you investing in Sudbury? Are you thinking about moving into Sudbury? Are you thinking about transitioning your business into moving into Sudbury? Let me know in the comments section down below. Share your experiences if you're currently an active landlord in Sudbury or if in the past you have been. As well, let us know if you're investing in any other markets in the greater Sudbury region. And finally, if there's a different city, a different market you'd like to see me do a deep dive analysis on, let us know in the comments section and you may see it on a future YouTube video pretty soon.